Hello, everyone. Um, Hello, I'm Kathy, and I'm wishing you all a warm Singapore welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We've just been waiting for more participants to join, but I think we can actually start right now. We've got attendees from over 10 countries joining, spanning from the different time zones in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, the Americas, and Europe. So it's good morning, it's good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's absolutely lovely to have all of you here joining us. Welcome to Decolonizing Funding, Building Agency and Resilience in the Palestinian Arts and Culture Sector, that's been organized by PACSOC, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes. But right now, in my role as moderator, please allow me to go through some of the house rules before we begin. We would love to have an open discussion, and in order to have that, we need a safe space. So we appreciate your respect for the wider backdrop against which this talk is happening. We do reserve the right to remove anyone who makes the space feel unsafe for any of the speakers and for the other participants as well. Thank you for your understanding. With me are three really distinguished speakers. Their accomplishments and credentials are formidable, but with their permission, I will be brief. I will introduce them briefly, but we will post their bios in the chat, and you're welcome to please acquaint yourselves with the work that they've done and the spaces that each of them have created through their practice. We start with Soheir Asaad, who is joining us from Haifa. Soheir is a political and feminist organizer and leads advocacy at Rawa Fund. She's also the co-director of Funding Freedom Project and an advisory board member at Adalah Justice Project. We're also joined with Iman, an award-winning actress and the co-founder and executive director of Ashtar Theatre in Ramallah. And our third speaker is Yazan Khalili. He's an artist and an architect and co-founder of Radio Alhara and the Question of Funding. And Yazan is currently in the Netherlands, where he's pursuing his PhD at the Amsterdam School for Cultural Analysis. Welcome to all speakers, and thank you very much. We thank them for being here with us. It's a real privilege to have all of you. On the back end, we actually have our technical manager, Syamsul Azhar, who is sitting in Kuala Lumpur and managing the webinar for us. We also have our producer, Dounia Benslimane, who is based in Casablanca, and we have Nidal Kabi from the Palestinian Performing Arts Network, who's been an integral part in organizing and getting this webinar off the ground. So we have an hour and a half, and we thought what we'd do is for the first hour, we would actually hear from the speakers, and then we'll open up the last 30 minutes for questions. So you are most welcome to actually post your questions through the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. Maybe I'd like to take a bit of time to talk a little bit about the background and how this webinar came about. So it's the first in a series that's been planned by the Palestinian Arts and Culture Solidarity Collective, PACSOC. We have a nice name, but we're really an ad hoc group of cultural workers and creatives and artists and policy people, arts managers from around the world. And all of us actually are working voluntarily. We started meeting in November last year in response to a call from Mike van Graan, the award-winning playwright and cultural advocate from South Africa. Mike sent out an email calling for collective action and solidarity with the Palestinian creative sector as it became clear that a genocide was about to be unleashed in November. We now have members from over 16 countries from the Global South, as well as allies from the Global North. PACSOC's work focuses on 4 areas. The first is to raise funds for the Palestinian arts sector via the OWNEH initiative, which we'll be hearing more about shortly. The second is to rethink and reshape cultural policy and international collaboration from a Global South paradigm. The third is to document and highlight cases of art censorship that involve Palestine. And the fourth is the PACSOC Declaration on the Goethe Institute that we would like to encourage you to read and support by adding your signature to the link in the chat. And now I think I'd just like to say that, what brings us here together specifically is our belief in the power and our faith, I believe, in the arts, in art to bring change. And so we thought we'd actually like to begin with just that, to begin with a bit of art. So I'd like to invite Iman to read a short excerpt from Ashtar Theatre's World famous Gaza monologues. Iman?
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, I will be reading from Ali Abu Yassin writings during the continuous genocidal war at the moment. Ali wrote this piece in February this year. So the title is All This Love. Not everything during the war is black. Whiteness exists as well, like a clear ray of sunshine that ignites my heart and soul. At war, things unfold, people become more transparent. Angels start to show what's best in them, and devils show their ugliest. Hypocritical worshippers multiply, and pure-hearted people show more of their harshness and pain. People appear naked as they are, and this is irreversible after war. I love my profession and the lifetime I spend on stage, acting, directing, training, writing, traveling, and staying for long hours in theater, longer than I ever spent with my family at home. I always ask myself, is theater worth all this fatigue, all that sacrifice, all the nerve-wracking fear, and the constant tension over the success or failure of a show? What a profession, whose beauty, cruelty, goal, and end has no limit. I also cherish my beloved audience, who through the past years showered me with much love, and they still do, even amidst the rubbles of war. In the middle of a bread queue or among the crowd in the market, some of them will come to greet me with all the love in the world. Oh, Mr. Ali, how are you? Are you well? I've seen all your work. Do you need any help? These words make me forget the war, the queues, and the cruelty of the moment. My fellow theater people, writers, filmmakers, artists, singers, you are my big family. During this war, you were the ones who eased the unbearable moments for me. Every call, every word, every action, and every letter you wrote was my refuge for steadfastness and survival. I love you all, and I love my profession. I also hope this nightmare will end soon, and we will return to our stage and fill the world with noise, beauty, life, love, and peace. Ali Abu Yassin is a theater director who works with Ashtar Theater since 1992. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. That was beautiful. And I really appreciate that we have the words of an artist from Palestine and from Gaza to ground us before we begin. So, you know, the genocide in Gaza has really centered the world's attention, but this is an occupation that's actually been going on for decades. And most of us would have some knowledge about some of the key factors and the circumstances that have led to the current war. But Soheir, can you maybe give us a bit of context about the history and so the context of civil society and development aid funding in the occupied territories, especially just, not just, within development, but also within the wider kind of context of Palestinian society and the impact that it's had on Palestinian self-determination?
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone who joined, especially those joining us from the Global South. At this moment, we want to center ourselves before starting the conversation about funding, to center ourselves in the global context for what's happening in the genocide that is happening in Gaza. It's really hard to talk about anything but Gaza these days. The genocide in Gaza has exposed so many global systems of oppression, including funding, and including the way funding has been situated in that. And for that, I want us to redefine the question that is before us. We are not only dealing with the question of funding starting from October 7. We are not dealing with the question of colonization of Palestine starting from October 7. When we're speaking about what's happening in Gaza, we want to trace it back to colonization historically in Palestine, up to the moment that we're seeing now, with the complete complicity that we're seeing from the West specifically, which is not only a complicity, it's a direct participation in the genocide. And I think this moment, with all the devastation that we're all feeling, especially also looking at the news today of the invasion of the refugee camps in the West Bank. I think this moment has granted us, a lot of us in Palestine and in the Global South, with a lot of clarity. And I think funding is situated exactly in that picture, in the picture of a complete complicity and accumulation of wealth and capitalism globally. And I know this might sound like a very far away conversation from what we're having, but I think it's a key to understanding what's happening in Palestine. Palestine is often exceptionalized. Also, the question of funding in Palestine is often exceptionalized. But if we look at it in the global kind of sense of how funding has been and what role has funding taken in Palestine, specifically in the Global South and vis-a-vis many oppressed communities, I think we understand that what's happening in Palestine maybe is the extreme, but it's a mirror of a larger picture. And I think it's a reminder for all of us to start as like, what is this money we're talking about? What is the funding that is received in Palestine? What is the funding that is received in the Global South? And where does this wealth come from? And coming from Rawa and the OWNEH initiative, and I'll explain later how this framework is also the framework that is guiding us. This wealth is basically mostly resources stolen from the Global South, mostly resources of colonized communities. And it's had to be seen in that context of colonization and in the context of capitalism and exploitation. And when it's sent to us, it's not a favor from anyone. It's not a contribution as in a charity framework that has dominated the fields for many years. It's the bare minimum of reparation that we as colonized people deserve. And I think in Palestine, if we want to trace how that played, we will have to look back at the Oslo. Since the Oslo Agreement, philanthropy and bilateral funding and aid, and I'm not gonna complicate it for the audience now and go through the many different ways funding and aid has reached to Palestine. But it's very important to understand that it's played a very central role in political subordination in Palestine, in turning a struggle for liberation against colonization into structures of NGOs. And I think if we look at especially the bilateral funding, which is to say the governmental funding that was sent to Palestine, for many years it has been used to preserve the status quo of colonization, of occupation, of forced displacement. And it's been used as an instrument to basically let Israel off the hook. While these countries, in one hand, send, since Oslo, millions of dollars to Palestinians. At the same time, these are the same countries that are providing military aid to Israel and all sorts of aid. And we're seeing this very clear in the genocide that we're witnessing, specifically looking at Gaza, at the US, who is an active part of this genocide, dropping both bombs through the Israeli military at Palestinians, and at the same time, dropping aid from the sky, which has also led to killing Palestinians. So that framework that ignores what's happening in Gaza, not looking at it as a man-made act of genocide and disconnecting it from the political context is not new. It's what funding and aid has been about in Palestine for many years. And to say that it's not only governments, it's also philanthropy in general, and including progressive philanthropy. And if we want to look at, for example, the way philanthropic institutions had been institutionalized in the US, for example, certain types of funds can have endowments and will will keep all that wealth and only release 5% of it to their programs, to the groups or organizations they're supporting both in Palestine or in other parts of the world. While we have seen that the 95% that is kept from these endowments many times is invested in harm, is invested in colonization, is invested in arms trade. And this is to say that it's not only a harm for Palestinians, it's a harm for all communities across the world, including in Sudan, including in Congo, including communities, for example, in the US itself, like Black people. So I think this is an example that shows how philanthropy will reach a hand in one hand and at the same time still be complicit through that wealth in the oppressive policies towards Palestinians, and is not a depoliticized kind of actor in the scene. It's part of the political subordination that we're seeing globally. And if we want to look at how philanthropy has been involved since Oslo in the scene of NGOs in Palestine. And as I said, instead of these organizations being an infrastructure for liberation, which is the history of many Palestinian organizations, including the cultural one historically, gradually funding has turned these organizations into NGOs. There were attempts to politically control through political conditions these organizations, to encourage culture of individualism, of competition, overfunding among them, and in really destroying the sense of social solidarity inside our community, and really turning them into into this illusion that you can do somehow political or social work that is disconnected from the context of colonization, and to view Palestinians as professionals that are depoliticized. And in that, I want to say that the conversation in Palestine around funding is so often pushed into Palestinians need more money. Palestinians need more funding. And I think it's a very wrong conversation. I think we do need resources to sustain ourselves, but we need to redefine what does resources mean. And resources mean, first of all, the resources that we have in our community, including people, including the volunteerism resources, which we has lost through the transfer into this framework that funding has established. And the conversation also should not be more money, but should be, where is this money coming from? What are the conditions attached to this money? And what effect it's creating on the ground? And if we trace back this funding, it's not only making us dependent on funders, on these states, it's also creating internal power balance, because these funders do spend a lot of money and choose who are they supporting inside of our community. And as much as people would love to look at Palestinians as a lump, we're not a lump. We have different actors in our civil society, different people. So this funding has for long been accessible more to what funders or states view as moderate, while silencing and sidelining actors that they viewed as too radical. And in a way, the game, or like the internal kind of process that should have been, has been affected by the power and the violence, I would say, of many. Now, after October 7, this has only escalated. Again, this doesn't start on October 7. The question around funding has only escalated after October 7, including punishment, including threats to employees, to organizations. And I'm not saying only in Palestine. Everyone who stood in solidarity with Palestine in the region or globally has been exposed to threats from donors who didn't only want to break the spirit of the Palestinian people, but also any solidarity that we see. Including amendments to contracts, including a statement denouncing Palestinian struggle for liberation and equating Israelis with Palestinians. So to sum up, before we jump to speaking about arts and culture, it's very important to acknowledge that this is part of that global scene, of that scene in Palestine specifically, and the role of funding and philanthropy in that kind of a global structure of oppression. And if we acknowledge it, and if we start with that our long-term aim is to dismantle philanthropy, is to be independent, this conversation should take us to what do we need to do. And I think OWNEH was another way of Palestinians, not the first one, definitely, to answer that. And we can speak more about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soheir. Thank you for sketching out the fragmentation and I think the destabilizing, ways that actually funding something that's put under the guise of charity or helping can actually, kind of inflict on all of our communities. I was just reading an article about how there's a desire to keep certain kinds of countries as aid givers and certain types of countries as aid recipients, and it's all linked really to the way that the global economy is kind of structured, right? So I think now maybe we can just narrow down a little bit, and maybe Iman, I can ask you if you can share with us a little bit about, what's it like on the ground? How does this, the kind of landscape that Soheir has described historically, how has this impacted, on the ground artists in the artist community, and particularly for you coming from the performing arts community? What's the shape of the work that people make? How is it reshaped or dictated by funding and by donor policies, donor intentions, and how is there resistance through this?
Thank you. Well, to continue from where Soheir was talking, the art scene in Palestine, which is not something new. It is something that is really historical and far from being an ad hoc response to what is happening, whether now or ever in the political realm. It is part of the true tapestry of the society, and so artists were always very aware and very much at the forefront of the work in terms of raising awareness of the society, or fighting back the different policies that had been imposed on us by the donor countries. And I would recall that in 2015, for example, we did a whole play talking about how the foreign aid is putting Palestine and Palestinian cause in a coma situation because they are just putting money into the either NGOs in general or the art scene in particular, and trying really to demonize the effect of these artists and activists and local NGOs. So they, since Oslo, particularly until the moment, also as Soheir had been saying, that the money was coming with a clear vision from the international donor organizations, is to really keep the status quo of the occupation. So whenever they would invest in big funding, they would never allow you to really speak against the occupation, or even to question the fact that if you are not in the art scene, but also in the big organizations that are working on the ground, like in development and infrastructure. Like whenever the Israelis would really destroy a place that had been supported by EU or by any donor organization, international organization, they wouldn't raise a question to the occupation and say that these were our money. So this is a cycle, a vicious cycle, in fact, that had put many organizations and many individuals into that realm in order to keep the sustainability of the civil society. The civil society had to really write applications for grants that were all the time shifting from one end to another, one topic to another, never really to develop and sustain the developmental approach into Palestine's West Bank or Gaza. So this had really culminated into a strong awareness at our end when the Palestinian Performing Arts Network, PAN, had been established in 2013 and registered in 2015, that the money should not be really the police of our organizations. The money should really be the tool that we really serve our community. And from that point on, we tried really to be cohesive in presenting what we want to do in our within our society, and how we are using the money to develop our youth mainly, and to work within our communities. And so after the October 7th and after the genocide started, we at Ashtar Theater, for example, we said, like many others as well, we said that this is the time to stop really this colonial intervention into our thinking process, into our strategic planning. And so it is the time really to be free from the decolonization of the granting or the grant making. And therefore, we started to look internally into our own power and what we could really do. And that had driven us to really look into the strength that had been all the time part of our mission, which is to free our people and to give them a voice to express themselves and to maintain their existence and their resilience. And so that had driven us to pick again the Gaza monologues that had been written in 2010 with our students who had faced the first war on Gaza in 2008-2010, and take these monologues and really spread them out to the world in order to tell the globe that the problem didn't really start in October 7, that we've been living under occupation for over 100 years, not even 75, and that the colonial approach to Palestine is very rooted, and it's not something that is going on as a reflection of what is happening to Israel or in Israel or with the Palestinians in Palestine. So saying this, we were able really to reach out to 62 countries around the world. Thousands of people had answered the call of the Gaza monologues, and they started to really read these monologues into their communities, which had driven a stronger engagement, a stronger solidarity from the artistic community around the world with what is happening. And people started to ask more what they could do and how they could help. So so this had also initiated our call for Letters to Gaza, because we thought that now that the world started to understand, to be more in contact of what is happening on the ground in Gaza, they want or they need to really express what they feel towards what is happening. And so they started to write these letters back. The letters now are being collected and they will be printed into a book in different languages. So this is also like a way that generates its own support. And support is not only money, support is also, as we said, solidarity, awareness, and empathy from the world. And so, so saying this, I really think that there are different ways that we could really generate the support of art and culture in and connect it to solidarity, because the key point here is how the international world understand the word solidarity. Solidarity doesn't only mean that you have to go in the street and protest. There are what I call the 10 commandments, if you want, of how you could really be part of an active solidarity in order to make a change. One would be to really amplify voices and the narratives of the Palestinians, because it's not enough to talk about Palestine, but it is also important to open up the space to host Palestinian artists, literature people, filmmakers, musicians, etc., onto their stages in order to talk to the people, because this would then create awareness and empathy from the society, because not everybody is aware. We think that they know. We think that they have been following the news. We think that they are they've been really able to understand what is happening. But there's always a claim from the international community that this is too complicated, we don't understand, or this is too much, we are unable to follow. So in order to create this kind of awareness, there has to be a real attempt from the international community to raise this awareness by really making, as I said, inviting people, but also humanizing the struggle. Because one thing that the international media had been between brackets successfully harming our struggle is by saying that the Palestinians are aggressive, the Palestinians are terrorists, etc., of all these stereotypical manchettes that they put on us. But when the international community are able to see artists face to face, when they are able to really understand from first mouth or mouth to mouth, then that makes a total difference, because then, as Augusto Boal would say, that we all the time speak in monologues. But when we meet, like we are meeting now, we have to speak in dialogue. There has to be a space where people can change their mentality, that they can understand much more. They would leave a space for contemplation. Otherwise, we are just rhetorically repeating the slogans. So creative protest is another thing. I mean, when internationals are in the streets, they could also present plays. They could do poetry reading. They could do digital or graffiti placards. It's not enough only to be there and march. It's important really to be artistically engaged, because it is the body, it is the mind, it is the heart that would really talk to those who are unconverted, because it is also important that the unconverted listen and follow. So the fourth would be also cultural boycott, of course, because and the ethical engagement in that, because what is happening is that some people throughout the years, even friends of us, artists from different parts of the world, would say, oh, but if you work with the Israelis, then that might create more potential for peace or for dialogue. But now it is time to realize, to understand that 99% of the Israeli society are for the war. Even those who are protesting in the streets at the moment, they say, bring them back and then do whatever you want in Gaza. So this is an important factor to realize, to understand, even after 40,000 and more martyrs. I mean, where do we go from there? There has to be a reverse in the way the cognitive reception works. And the fifth would be also building solidarity through cross-cultural exchange. So everybody here, everybody that is hearing us are invited to come to Palestine. See for yourself. Try to be engaged on the ground. Try to volunteer. Try to understand. Just cross one checkpoint and you will understand it all. Many internationals who came to Palestine over the years were coming also as pro-Israeli activists. Once they enter the West Bank and they cross the checkpoints, they were able to realize for themselves. We don't want to preach you. We want you to feel yourself, to experience yourself what we are passing through. And we respect your mind, of course, and we are sure that your mind will be transferred. So as well as you could make twinning with organizations. So the twinning aspect is an important aspect because as Soheir was saying, and as Kathy was saying, we're here to discuss the decolonization of the grant making and the support. But also the twinning is another way of keeping the cultural organizations vibrant and alive. And that is an important factor. The sixth would be keep the memory alive. Keep the memory of what happened alive. Because when things end, people will tend to forget. This is not forgettable. This is important. This is not acceptable. What is happening, this genocide, is not forgettable. There has to be a stake in that where the world would realize that they had been part of it, complicit in it. And so they have to really, I don't want to say pay, but the world is paying for what had happened in the Holocaust. But this is also what is happening at the moment. The world has to be aware that this is not acceptable. So seventh is challenging the stereotypes and reclaiming the representation. Don't accept the fact that people would tell you that Palestinians are the aggressive ones or the terrorists, or they are, because there is a fight between the culture or between religion. It has nothing to do with a fight between religion, although the colonial world really tried to impose that in the mind of everyone. Inspire hope and resilience through keeping the pride and the unity of the Palestinians. So this is also part of the realization and understanding that Palestinians are one, whether they are living in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in the occupied territory 48, or in the diaspora. Palestinians are one, and they are a unity, and we have to respect that. So the international community has to respect that as well. Engaging youth, because for me, youth are the key segment that would make the change. Therefore, if we work with the youth, now they are youth, either in schools or universities. Tomorrow, they are the leaders of the world. So if we do not really tap their door, tap their mind, tap their hearts, then we will lose them later. Education is an important factor. At the moment, the Israeli government are trying to make a deal with the UK to present the Israeli curricula or an Israelite, how do you say, subject in the education of the UK in order for every child to understand what the Zionist plan is. So transform the public spaces, transform your schools, your theaters, and the street, and try all the time to make connection with the Palestinians and what the Palestinians need to say. So this is what I wanted to say, and we can say more later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iman. There's so much of what you said, resonates, and there's so much that I want to unpack. But I maybe we'll just pick on two things before I actually, call on Yazan to speak. One of the things that I do is that I document a lot about censorship in the arts, and of course, the narrative is always that, in the third world, in the global south, there is no artistic freedom because we're all controlled by our despotic governments, right? But I'm so struck by what you're saying about, and this is something that we are seeing here as well in different ways, that it's actually funding censorship by stakeholders, right? So it's the funder actually that actually controls access to funds and resources, and therefore in a really hidden way exacts an immense kind of control. But what really strikes me also is the fact that if you look at global rankings for freedom of expression, Israel, never comes up. It doesn't, even if it might be on that list, it never makes the BBC, it never makes, the mainstream media. It is always China, or it's Cuba, or it's, Singapore, for example. And so I think that kind of offers a lot of cover, right? So a lot of protection, which has, in fact, fallen away right now. The other thing, maybe just to kind of pick up, because I know that Yazan and the work that he's been doing is looking at, kind of the kind of cultural economy and funding. But one of the things that struck me about when you were talking about the Gaza monologues is how, in a way, it upends that kind of global kind of art economy. So the way that, you create a work, you take it on tour, you get funded for it, and it's very much part of a capitalist kind of touring network. And what struck me about Gaza monologues is the way that it circumvented that kind of structure, that the work was sent out, and it was sent out for free, but then the value that was then generated by the work being produced and staged all over the world was a kind of, it's a kind of cultural capital, right? It's about narrative. It is about platforming Palestine to people who might not previously have paid attention to it or might not have understood it. And so the kind of value that act of art, that art was able to generate, is perhaps, not, that is another way of decolonizing some of the ways that the cultural economy works internationally. Yazan, I was reading some of your interviews, and one of the things that you said in an interview before Documenta, leading up to Documenta, was you talked about the question of funding, and you said that it tries to argue that funding here is not an issue of finance as much as it is an issue of economy and culture, meaning that the type of economic structures of funding creates certain cultural practices. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you meant by this, and then how it relates to the question of funding and to Daira?
Hello everyone, and thank you, Soheir and Iman, for your interventions and what you said. I actually find it hard now to speak, especially after Iman's presentation. I think it's very relevant and very essential at this moment. And also, I want to say, thinking about talking about funding and cultural institutions at this time is although it's very important, but it also one doesn't know how to fit it within this time. Like there is all like the urgency of the genocide itself, and what's happening makes it hard for one to think of other important issues that one has been dealing with before the beginning of the genocide. But nonetheless, and as Soheir said, like the way the humanitarian aid has been used as a tool of starvation and a tool of controlling, a tool of hegemony, a tool of killing, shows us how the dependency on a certain economy of food, economy of funding, and economy of culture creates total vulnerability within the people. And one of the most important aspects of surviving is diversity, the diversity of the chain of resources, that no nation, no group of people, no society or community is dependent on only one type of support. And when I say support, I'm not only talking about international or outside support, but the type of economy and resources a society uses for its daily survival and daily living. Another thing, that there's no independency without dependency. Like you are never independent in that kind of vacuum. Independency is a dependency on a different type of infrastructures. And when we talk about being independent from the donor economy, it's never meant that you are living in a vacuum, but rather that you are dependent on different ways of surviving, different ways of living, different ways of support, locally, internationally. So in a way, independence is more just way of dependency, and also more political, and there's more agency in the act of in the dependency within the independence. I hope it's not very acrobatic. I'm now living outside of Palestine. I'm doing my PhD. So, and my I have to close my phone. 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry. I came here due to to do my PhD on cultural institutions in Palestine, and the relation and part of my research is on the effect of donor economy on the cultural practices in Palestine, on understanding what culture is and the cultural infrastructure that we are working with. And one can say every cultural practice is a product of a certain economical structure. There's culture is a product of an economy, and it's a product of ways and power structures of the economy and how it works, and is it a top-down kind of an economy, it produces a certain type of culture, or is it a bottom-up economy, and therefore it produces it's more grassroots, more communally connected cultural practices. And since my work in Khalil Sakini Cultural Center, the main aspect back then was dealing with the financial crisis that came out from the change in the cultural funding and the funding that we were dependent on before 2014. By that time, there was changes and shifts within the donor economy after the Arab Spring, and that affected a lot medium to small cultural institutions in Palestine. And as Soheir said, and it's very important to always remember, Palestine is an extreme case of the world. In a way, one can imagine that Palestine is the laboratory of extreme cases where politics, economy is tested and pushed in a place that is still in shifts and changes. And there you can see how these kind of changes create, what kind of results are created by enforcing and doing these kind of policies or these kind of economical policies as well. So so the main thing that we had to deal with at that time is a main question: is the way to deal with the funding crisis is to get more funding, or to look at funding from a different perspective, from the perspective of to turn the financial crisis into a cultural question? And what that meant was to change the way we approach funding, from calling for and trying to find international funding and to refit ourselves and to readjust the institution in a way that it can find new resources in the donor economy, or to rechange the institution and to refit it to be more dependent on social networks that see in the institution an extension of its cultural life. And for a reason, which I will explain later, we went to the other side, to trying to reconfigure the institution politically, and therefore economically, and eventually also culturally, in a way that it is dependent on a network of cultural producers, on the society itself, that see this that see in the institution an extension for their cultural practices, of their political views, of their social life, and that the institution descales and becomes smaller in its needs, but it expands by its connection and by its ability to engage with a bigger with the society it's part of. And I would say the reason we could do that is because we didn't have to pay rent. And I put, few lines under the idea that the building that the institution was using then until now was leased by the Ministry of Culture to the institution for a long period, for like 20 years, and now it's being extended. There's some issues there. I'm not going to go into it, but the fact, and this is one of the most important issues, I think, that many of the cultural institutions in Palestine and elsewhere in the world, here in the Netherlands, is the same, that cultural practices that don't stand on strong, static ground are very fragile with the economical and political shifts that happen around them. And when I say static ground, I mean ground, really ground, meaning you have a building, you have a space, you have a physical place that is able to take the shocks that happens with the political shifts that happens with the funding processes and the shifts in the funding approaches and the donors approaches to why they want to fund or not. And this is one of the and when I say Palestine is an extreme place, because the land in Palestine is what the struggle is for, no? And when you look at Palestine as an extreme case of the world, you can understand what's happening around us in the world with the neoliberal policies of making all our cultural institutions fragile through being totally dependent on one type of resource. We have to pay, they have to pay rent. They have to, their existence is so dependent, physical existence as a space, as a place, as a focal point of the society, is very dependent on receiving the fund to pay rent, for example. And again, when I say neoliberal economy, I'm talking about the whole real estate economy that is pushing out and taking over all these spaces that are very essential for the society and making them very fragile through these kind of economical, financial structures. Yeah, I forgot my. So what the question of funding was trying to do, and I think now I see we're also in contact back then with another kind of initiative which is called OWNEH, which also sounds like OWNEH. This is MUNE, but it is it's aimed to think of the existing resources within any society, the existing wealth within any society that we can, in the time of crisis, and hopefully with the development of our political understanding of of how do we liberate ourselves from being dependent on a certain type of funding. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm against funding as such. No, that's not what I mean. I'm saying what type of funding we depend on is very essential, and what are the political threads that come with any type of funding that we work with. But the main idea was that within any society there exists different types of wealth, and this wealth can be understood in its physical meaning, spaces, equipment, tools, cars, whatever is needed at a point, in its labor meaning, volunteers, people who are interested, people who can have time to give and support, and also in its in knowledge bases. So what knowledge does exist within the society, what can be used, exchanged, learned, and extended, and also financial. Who can support what? Like at a certain time, the society, and this is in part of our research, there are so many different types through which the society always comes and supports its members within its life. Meaning, for example, al-unqut in weddings, which means dripping, which is a type of financial support that everyone who wants to get married depends on in order to get married, and this kind of support that lives beyond and lives across generations and keeps on moving. Different types. I don't think the space is there's enough space to speak about them now. But this is mainly the question of funding and how it began. And
so it sounds yeah. I feel that we could do a separate webinar on each of the things that you've all spoken about. But maybe just kind of when you were speaking about the work that you're doing, the research and the experimentation that you're doing, it sounds like it looks at resources rather than from a scarcity model, which kind of breeds competition. It looks at it as an abundant, that there is actually an abundance of different kinds of resources, and rather than competing, then the model becomes collaborating and sharing. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, and just to say that the dipping, is it dipping or dripping?
Dripping.
We have that here too. It's the hongbao, the angpao. So it's the red packet that or the duit hantaran, which is the it's money that's gifted to the new couple to set them up. Okay, so we're running a little bit behind time, and we've got questions already. So I'd maybe like to actually come back to Soheir, because one of the things that PACSOC's been trying to do is actually we want to use this webinar to kick off some fundraising for OWNEH Foundation to support the creative sector. And maybe, Soheir, you can maybe talk to us a little bit about this this initiative and how it works, who benefits from it, what the structure is, what the decision-making process is, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, again, and thank you, Yazan and Iman. Actually, the conversation really lays the ground to speak about OWNEH. It's important also to say that OWNEH is not the beginning of Palestinians' attempts to deal with the question of funding. This is a question that has been concerning for Palestinians for many years. Different initiatives evolved, different analysis, and I think it's a case that other people around the world can look at to really understand the impact of funding and the kind of shifting of the culture of work inside a community and what we can do about it. So I think before really jumping into speaking about OWNEH, I want to emphasize what both Iman and Yazan said and what I said before. I don't think sometimes people don't understand how harmful funding is. Funding is not simply the political conditions. It's not simply only the punishment. It's the absolute shifting of our culture of how do we work within our community, how do we relate to our community, and what is the framework that is guiding us. And I think this is part of the main realization that it's not enough to shift the source of money. What we need is actually to rethink and deeply look and examine where we are now, including those of us who are trying to do amazing work. And it's not simply the task of only those who accept political conditions. It's also the task of us who reject it, but really need to look internally and see what have this culture of funding, and in a larger sense, not only funding, but the world that we operate in, the colonial structure, neoliberalism has impacted the way we work. And the way it designed work that will fit into projects, that will fit into kind of a professionalism, a framework, instead of really doing the work as part of a liberatory framework. So when we speak about OWNEH, after October 7, some of us, different organizations, came together to try to think, how do we address what happened in October 7 and again after October 7, but again, with the historical background that it's not about October 7, neither in funding nor the reality in Palestine. October 7 is just the symptom, it's just what we saw escalating. And the genocide created a moment that we have seen so many, not only those who are trying to control us, including allies, abandon, punish Palestinians the moment Palestinians resist. And I think that was a transformative moment for many of us to think about, how do we sustain this work? How do we work towards independency? So OWNEH is is not only simply the OWNEH fund, but OWNEH is a group of Palestinian organizations, cultural and non-cultural organizations, grassroots organizations, those who work in philanthropy, others who don't work in philanthropy, and really to try to think together where are we moving beyond that. One of the main elements of OWNEH is a political statement. It's really kind of situating the question of funding with the analysis I provided at the beginning, really in a global sense of how funding and development has been used as a tool of violence in Palestine and across the global south, exploitation, and then really situating its impact on Palestinians, and really coming together and committing as organizations to both political principles and also specific acts internally. And really one main pillar was not only how to bring money, but really to shift the question. The question is not only how much money we have, what is the type of work we do. The question should be, where is our community now? How do we understand the situation? What is needed? And then how do we resource it? And again, resources is not only money. That's why, in addition to the political principles like rejecting normalization, rejecting political conditions and political kind of dominance of not only states, but also funders, really shifting the framework from charity and aid into resilience, shifting the framework from project support into solidarity, that we as Palestinians decide what to do with the resources that we receive. We have the decision over it. And as we know, funders really hate giving money away that is sustainable, that organizations can break with dependency and really continue the work without them. So in a way, what we invite funders also to do is to invest in their own irrelevance, to invest in us being able to control these resources. Now, moving from that, the statement has signed so far by around 30 organizations. And of course, we can provide more information about that. In addition to the statement, there was a really centering what is called basket of resources. And what does that mean? It's really us trying to put an end to the mindset of competition, to the fact that everything we need to hire someone, we need to hire services, we need to pay, instead of actually looking at our collective resources, what we can offer each other, really reclaiming some of the wisdom. It's not new, it's part of the wisdom of the way we struggled. It's something you can see in the history of Palestinian struggle, but also across different communities. So really breaking with this new liberal mindset of individualism, of competition, and really reclaiming the understanding of what resources, what is the strength that we have in our community, and really expanding what is the community we work in. Breaking with elitism is also part of what we declared as part of OWNEH. So the basket of resources before the fund is an integral and very important part of that. So we need to look at it as a holistic initiative that have all these aspects. The other part of it is Aid Watch, really reviving Aid Watch, which is really aiming at holding funders accountable, because it's not simply funders, again, imposing political condition. It's an actual harm. It's an actual harm of silencing for many years, and like to try to think about it in the large scale that is happening since the early 90s and before. Really the harm of what it did to our infrastructure for liberation, and what kind of political statements we saw after October 7 that really were equating colonizers with the colonized people. The actual, when people put out these statements, they're not just a bad mistake. They're not just only political mistake. We're really speaking in the context of genocide. When these statements are put out, they are really instruments to legitimize genocide. And people who put them out, they need to understand that they're part of enabling this genocide. So in that sense, we're not only holding them accountable for the harm they cause to Palestinian organizations, but more largely for the legitimization of our oppression, for the continuous colonization of Palestine, and the onslaught that we're seeing now in Gaza. Another aspect of it, and which is the aspect that we're trying to think about together now, is the OWNEH Fund. The OWNEH Fund is aimed at supporting organizations, those who were punished by donors, after October 7, or those who actively took steps to disengage with donors who who issued statements or imposed political conditions. So it's in a way our way to come together, not in that mind of surviving alone. Each organization has to deal with cutting funds and survive alone, which is the mindset that we've been a kind of used to because of that culture of funding. Really to understand how do we come together as a community and to think differently about resources. And again, to shift from the mindset of big grants, big money, into really every contribution, if it comes from a place of solidarity and complete trust of us Palestinians being able to manage these resources, to invest them in the long term, to break from dependency is kind of what is guiding us when we speak about this fund. I know we really have only 15 minutes for a conversation with the audience, so I really don't want to take more time. But
so here, I think if I can just say, take your time, because I think we can actually, if we need to, we'll stay for a bit longer. So please continue.
Thank you. So in a way, I think for me, this is an invitation not only for us Palestinians to think about the way we think about resources. OWNEH is not only that, it's also inviting those who stand in solidarity with us to understand that when we speak about philanthropy based on solidarity, that every contribution is really valuable for the longer sustainability of Palestinians based on solidarity and resilience framework. Because as I said before, what funding does is not only the political conditions, but also the way this money can be used, and the fact that funders in general, either governments or funders who are non-governmental, really come with this mindset of the need of continuous control of resources and the way we operate under them. So the OWNEH initiative is also for us to break from these restraints, to be able to think in a collective way on how we bring this pool of resources and think about it as part of a larger ecosystem. And again, not as part of this culture of individualistic kind of frameworks and mere survival of organizations. As for the decision makers making, as I said, there is a statement that each organization joins, and it's a commitment from this organization to adhere by the principles presented, and also to think deeply and to really reevaluate and think about the culture of work that they have internally, but also vis-a-vis other groups and grassroots organizations in the Palestinian community. And we're in the process of really establishing the fund, of setting the fiscal sponsors and other parts of that. But I think what we're trying to do today is really to encourage those who are engaged with the culture and artwork on Palestine to support through first solidarity and action to stop the genocide. This is the most important ask we have for people, before resources, before money. And then really, if you want to impact the work and really not look at Palestinians as lump, but really empower those who work towards liberation, who works toward really thinking about the grassroots in Palestine, away from the attempts to manage our politics internally, is really to think, who are you contributing any financial support to at this moment? And of course, we acknowledge that we are in a moment of emergency, that Gaza is being annihilated, and that, of course, the priority is for that, for really the resilience of our people in Gaza and the refugee camps in the West Bank and other areas that are affected by Israeli oppression. But it's also important to remember that urgency and aid are not the solution, because with Israel destroying Gaza, it's not only killing our people, it's not only, it's destroying every aspect of our community, universities, school, organizations, all type of grassroots work that is done on the ground. And these big organizations and big donors would send the money to those who will manage it without the actual will of Palestinians. And we're seeing the conversation already about rebuilding Gaza. It's a conversation without us. It's a conversation that is aimed to establish the continuation of the situation created by the genocide, the complete political control of what happens to Gaza and Palestine if there were a ceasefire. And from our past experience of the wars in 2014 and 2021 and many different wars happening in Gaza, we know how rebuilding Gaza was used as a tool. And the best, it wasn't even, it didn't even happen. Before this genocide, we were still speaking about rebuilding Gaza's houses destroyed in 2014. So every conversation that is happening today is not an honest, genuine conversation. As long as these powers are continuing to enable genocide, to send weapons, and at the same time claim to care for Palestinians through rebuilding Gaza and aid, we know that this is part of the same war. Aid and rebuilding is part of the equation of the same war. It's just another hand that is aimed at political subordination and control of Palestinians. So if we want to think about why in OWNEH we're presenting this in the middle of an emergency, because we believe in the long-term support for the Palestinian liberation. We believe in that the only thing that would save us if there is a ceasefire and a stop of this horrible genocide we're seeing in Gaza is us being able to rebuild our community ourselves with our resources and with our allies and people who stand truly in solidarity with us, no matter how small this money is. It would be competing against both violence and oppression and killing, but also domination and violence of money that is coming from those who wish to control us. So in a way, when I think, and we think about OWNEH, we think about it in that larger framework. Our resources and the resources of those who stand with us, whether it's monetary or non-monetary. So really, this is an invitation to stand in solidarity with us, to engage with us beyond money, and really to support the culture and artwork in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and across all historic Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Soheir. It's incredible how much you managed to fit it into such a short time, and it made absolute perfect sense and, you know, so impassioned. I would actually like to open up the, first of all, thank you to Iman and Yazan and Soheir. We'll continue the conversation now with the attendees. There have already been questions that have been posted, and maybe I'll just take one of the first questions actually, which is actually for Iman. I think it was from Dr. Ann Lee, asking about, sorry, let me see if I can find it. Give me 1 second. I think Anne had a question asking about the who are the donors, for example, now for Ashtar Theatre. Am I right, Anne? You can post.
Okay. Well, the actual donors are individuals who are really supporting us through the system of platforms, the Global Giving Platform, and also in terms of solidarity engagement, because they were part of the Gaza monologues or other work with Ashtar. There's also the Arab Fund, who we have a support from them at the moment, or 3 years ago, but it's still going on. So so these are mainly our supporters at the moment. There's like small things here and there through traveling or going and performing, and so also theaters who are inviting us. They support our travel and stay. So all these small things that are really part of the basket, if you want. But yeah, I mean, we had funds that we had to give back as well, and we stopped fundraising the classical way that we used to, like, to write grants and put it up, and because of what had been said today. So
Thank you. I'd also like to invite, if there are people here who would like to post their questions in another language aside from English, please do so. And I'm sure between everyone here, we'll find a way to translate your questions for the panelists. I would like to, so let me read this question. This is from Caroline Amalia. How do you see the Palestinian civil society organizations working with art, being able to negotiate agency in relation to the international donors in Palestine? What are the strategies that you apply? Who would like to take this question? Iman, is this something that you can respond to?
I will, yes, I will start to, if you want. Okay, but maybe if you just say it one more time. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Can you can't see it, yeah?
I don't know, maybe I did not open it.
Let me try and copy paste it and I'll send it to you. Excuse us, we're all slightly blind leading the blind a little bit.
I see it now. Sorry. How do you see the civil society organizations working with art, being able to negotiate agency in relation to the okay, so one important factor that had always been the case in presenting the art is that art doesn't really, I mean, well, let's put it this way. Usually, and I will be talking about the thing that we do at Ashtar. I cannot talk about other colleagues, but usually what we do is we are in close contact with our community through the fact that we work on the ground with them through using theater of the oppressed. And so we always have stories back from them of what is important. We always visit villages and remote areas where we collect new stories and we see what the needs are on the ground. And so when we decide to do a project, we go back to the community and we ask them whether this or that would be an interest for them. So there were many times a response to what had been like the Gaza monologues. We responded to the first war by retrieving the stories of the young people in 2009. There were a response about the refugees who, the Palestinian refugees who left Syria, etc. So there are sometimes responses that we believe that it is our role as theater makers, as part of the art scene, to really talk about these things. But most of the time when we think of a play or when we think of a program, we try to really listen to our community. But saying this as well, the strategy that Soheir talked about is an important factor. Without the strategy, we can never do development. So there has to be a thorough vision of what the arts can do in Palestine. What is the role of performing arts in Palestine, and where can we go with this in order to create youth that are free from within, free from outside, and also understand freedom and work for freedom. So these are key points. And so when we talk to donors, this is what we try to really talk about. I mean, we don't go with them and fish. We don't, like, if there are today they would support women and tomorrow they support HIV and the third day they would support something else. We don't do that because that is very harmful. This is part of this delusional intervention within the society that would make the society out of breath. The civil society, I mean, and specifically the NGO organizations, because otherwise we become only like a school of fish following what the donors would give us, and it is very important to understand that when we enter in a relationship with any donor, it is a relationship whether they like it or not. I mean, it's not a submissive relationship. It is an equal relationship. They give us the money not because they are, but not because they like us, because they are obliged to give the money. And it's not their money. It's not the organizational money. It's not the government money. It's the people's money. It's the money that comes from taxpayers. And so when they ask us about how how we spend this money and the sustainability, they are faking it. And Marina, my friend from Al-Hara, who is with us in the audience, I suppose, she wrote something really very important. She said, over the years, the donor agencies were selling us like the idea of human rights. Human rights, what? Human rights of the white man? What human rights when nowadays, with what is happening in Palestine, no one is really talking about any rights for the Palestinians. So I mean, they are shutting us up. They are shunning the eloquent people who are speaking, the artists, etc., etc. So all this is, we have to be very careful about. We have to understand it. We have to be able to understand our position. So we have to negotiate from a very strong position. If you don't want to give us money, don't give us money. We don't want your money. But also, I want to answer Yazan from the beginning of the session, because yes, we can work without money. We can, if we can all volunteer, and we do volunteer all the time. But what we do parallel to volunteering, we work with the global economy. We work with the imperialistic machine that is also creating its foundation in Palestine. So what do we do? This is a big question. It's not that we don't work in the arts for money, because we don't have the money. So we work in factories that are really probably producing or helping producing arms, or just helping the occupation. So this is an important factor, an important question. It's a moral question that we each and every one of us need to ask oneself, but also it's a general question for everyone here with us today and hearing us. It's like, where do you work? What type of food do you buy? Which university do you go to? Is it complicit or not? Is it supporting the arms or not? Is it like, what kind of world are we building together? Because these days we are not building one space. I mean, whether we like it or not, we are living in a small village. Yes, whether we like it or not, but we are. That's the problem, and we are all together in one pot. So we are all facing the same domination and oppression. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. There's another question from Iman. I'll read it out. I don't know if the Soheir and Yazan as well, are you able to see this? In Arab countries and countries of the global south in general, the same culture of funding prevails and the same restrictions apply, regardless of the massive wave of mobilization that is certainly important in shaping the efforts of decolonization, but not enough at this stage, in my view. Do you consider enlarging and strengthening transnational ties with those involved and confronted with these same obstacles in these countries part of the solution? So kind of global solidarity that you were talking about, I think, Iman. If yes, what is the best way to proceed? I do believe it is time to put our collective efforts in that direction, in addition to what we are each doing in our respective fields. Thank you.
I can jump
in. No.
Yeah, go ahead. Would you go ahead?
Yeah, I can jump in, and I actually want to answer it also in relation to the comment, I think, posted by Al-Hara Theater about European governments. I think what we're witnessing, especially in a stark way during this genocide and historically, is these same governments and these same states that have a history of colonization in Palestine, in the region, in the global south, of oppression, displacement, slavery, stealing resources, are the same who are acting with complete hypocrisy at this moment, are the same that are oppressing the voices that are standing in solidarity with Palestine, are the same who are through their media covering up and really enabling a genocide, are the same that are dragging protesters in the street, are the same who are sending police to their universities to oppress students who are protesting. So in a way, what we know about funding historically under different themes, freedom of speech or whatever, is really a framework of a colonizer, white savior kind of attitude toward the global south, where they claim the moral high ground in relationship to what we have in our communities without recognizing the immense amount of harm that has led to what we see in our region, in the global south in general. So it's very important when we engage in this conversation to engage with it in that level and to understand that all of that discourse is the same racist. Its origins are racism and white supremacy, and we need to put this on the table. So Palestine, in that sense, is not exceptional to that framework globally. And I think parts of the way it looked like we've seen it is through themes that someone in Europe sitting and sees a trend, whether it's freedom of speech, another day it's a feminist work, which we're doing it without anyone's aid. And at a certain point will decide the whole priorities for a region or for a community based on that themes. And we saw it in Palestine also with describing the reality and geographic fragmentation that we've seen in funding. For example, funders who will not send funds to Gaza after 2006, funders who will consider Palestinians in 48 as not Palestinians, but rather as an Israelis, and therefore outside of the framework of funding that goes to Palestinians. And I think when we speak about where we're going, and part of what OWNEH is addressing is actually that fragmentation, that using of themes that looks like neutral, but is actually part of redefining our reality and moving to really fragment us. Now, this fragmentation that we saw in Palestinians across geographies, across sectors, across communities, we're seeing it in the regions, in our region, through we cannot say that colonialism ended in our region. The dictatorship regimes, whether we're seeing the oppression that we're seeing across the region, it is really largely due to support from colonizers across Europe and the United States. The same people who are arming Israel are enabling oppression in the whole region around us. And it's also, again, reflected in funding. And part of the strategies that we saw after October 7 and in the recent years is actually, let's send funding to Egypt that is conditioned and punish them if they stand, like Egyptian civil society, if they stand with Palestinians, for example. We've seen it across North African countries. We've seen it across countries neighboring to Palestine. And we've seen it playing in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. Everyone who tried to stand in solidarity with Palestinians were attacked, not only by government, but also by funders who were an actor, an oppressive actor that we need to see, we need to see it in that way. And I know the intuition of many of us is to survive, because once Palestine is not, what's happening in Palestine is not only impacting Palestinian NGOs, it's also cutting resources from organizations in the global south, Black organization, other organizations that organize globally. And the immediate reaction sometimes is to survive on our own, is to be silent, to deal with it alone, to try to get more resources by really abandoning solidarity. But we need to remember that solidarity with Palestine is not because we're exceptional as Palestinians. It's not a one-way solidarity. It actually comes from us understanding that whatever oppresses Palestinians oppresses people in the global south. Whatever oppresses Palestinian is the leading force behind what's happening in Sudan, behind what's happening in Congo, behind what we're seeing as political control in Latin America, behind what we're seeing in the US from killing and Black people. Our oppressors are not only ideologically aligned, they're aligned with technology, with arms, with economy, with surveillance. And we need to understand that the liberation of Palestine is a cause for the liberation of all of us. It's also related to the struggle, the feminist struggle, the climate justice struggle, to the struggle of indigenous people. So when you stand in solidarity with Palestine, it's all, to begin with, a solidarity with your own people. And therefore, first, I think we need to be rooted in our communities. I work in solidarity, I work in advocacy, but I think all of us need to start to be rooted in our communities, to see the harm that was created globally, to shift the culture the way we're trying to do with the OWNEH initiatives, to go back to our resources, to really thrive to independency, and then to learn from each other, to learn from different experiences. We're not creating the wheel. We're not inventing the wheel. Historically, people have struggled, have really turned out to their power internally, had really strived for independence. There is a lot of experiences across the global south, across the globe, and we need to try to learn from it and to stand in solidarity with each other beyond learning, beyond statement, in action, in really disrupting that power and force behind our oppression, to block arms manufacturers that are impacting people, to block the streets, to really protest inside universities and media, and really to understand that this is a whole kind of complex system of oppression, but at the same time, it's very simple. It's really targeting all of us everywhere. And I think with us really coordinating efforts of solidarity, we need to understand that as long as we don't have peace and justice, our oppressors don't get to enjoy it. And therefore, I think to start first from our communities and then to connect in that level globally. And to be honest, this is happening already. It's happening both among movements, it's happening both around with grassroots organizations and NGOs, and it's happening also in the funding world. And there's a lot to be done there. I hope I addressed the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Soheir. Actually, I think you answered also, in Yusuf El-Idrisi's question as well. We are at 10:12, and maybe I will just open up for, if there's any more, it's the last chance to ask a question. If you have any questions, please post it now. If not, we will just round up, and maybe I can actually, I would like to ask maybe for each of the panelists here, is there, do you have some parting words for us? Because what we have here are in this room with you are artists and creatives and people who also work with words and narrative. And is there anything that you'd like to say to everyone here in closing? Can we go with, can we start with Yazan? Just brief comments from each of you. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I want to say that solidarity is in itself a type of funding, in a way to claim back the word funding that has been taken from us by the financial sector. So funding at the end is, solidarity is about also people putting their time, effort, knowledge in support, and in action towards a struggle. So in a way, I think I take it also from what Iman was saying in the 10 points that she was mentioning, that solidarity in itself is a type of funding, it's a type of support that can take different shapes and ways. So just to say this, because I think what Soheir and Iman were saying is very covering many of what can one say in general.
Thank you, Yazan. Iman?
Yeah, all I want to say is this is very important. These gatherings are really important, and thank you for PACSOC for facilitating this. And I believe that if we do not really like start the wheel of meeting, talking, and it doesn't need only to be webinars. Sometimes it is good to be like a conference call, even with everybody to see each other. And I know that in PACSOC we're doing that in groups, but I'm not saying not, but I'm saying that it has to be contagious. So so it can also go in different groups and in different directions, and so let's all think of liberating our independence. Liberating our independence. Independence of the thought, independence of the action, and independence of the money. Liberate our independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. Soheir?
I think I've said a lot in my previous comments, so I'll just leave it to you, really thanking you for this gathering of allies and people who stand with solidarity with Palestinians. Really, it's important to emphasize that we want to center what's happening in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, and all of these conversations that we're having today is for the resilience of Palestinian grassroots work, but we need to remember that it's in a framework of us working towards liberation. How do we do it together, both in Palestine, without dependency on those who oppress us, who cause all this torture that we're seeing? And at the same time, how do we reclaim other type of resources, other type of solidarity? Where do we find it? In our communities, with our allies, with our other oppressed people that we don't have to explain so much to, where they can actually understand that pain, that actually can understand that experience without too much information or details or data, really can relate to that. So I think our task is to think how we build this resilience, how we build that path in Palestine, but also to start to reflect how do we do it together globally, how it also not only benefits the struggle for Palestinian liberation, but liberation in other contexts and other communities. So thank you again.
Thank you, Soheir. So on behalf of PACSOC, I'd like to just thank the speakers, and maybe in closing, I would really urge all the participants, all the attendees, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate that you've been here and that you've listened with so much of care and attention, and for your comments and your support and the love icons that have been encouraging our speakers along. I would really urge you to please copy paste the information on how to donate. Please give generously, but also give of your time and give of action by sharing the information about the campaign and about OWNEH Foundation with friends of yours. Share them outside of your arts network, because not only within the arts network, but outside as well, and think creatively of ways that you can support this initiative. It could be that if you're doing an art event, is there a percentage of your takings that could be dedicated, for example, to OWNEH initiative? So we would also like to, I think there's information for those of you. There have been a couple of questions about how, how to show solidarity. There are many, many, many different ways. I mean, PACSOC is just one, but if you want, please do join, and we will keep you posted. We will be holding more such seminars and events in the future. And now, thank you very much. Please join me in just thanking really Soheir, Yazan, Iman. I really appreciate the amazing kind of the time that you've given under very difficult circumstances. It's been really tremendous. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Kathy, for moderating this and everybody else.
It's a pleasure. It's a privilege.
For Dounia and Sam for all the labor and Nidal. Thank you so much.
I actually have some closing words. I just want to also just to say that, you know, the team behind today's webinar, aside from the speakers and myself, there's of course Dounia, who I've mentioned, and Sam, but also Nidal Kabi from the Palestinian Performing Arts Network. I'd like to also thank Sverre Pedersen of Free Muse and Dr. Anne Lee of Penn Malaysia, Mike Van Gran, who started all this with an email, and also the rest of the PACSOC members who have contributed in many different ways to make this panel, and sorry, this webinar possible. Thank you, everybody, and good evening.